With so much progress last time, I've been feeling more enthusiastic with the router table build. Now that I've got the pairs of legs completed, I'm ready to join the stretchers to the rails. The instructions I am following require me to place a dowel into the stretchers so that the lag screws have some grain to grab onto. This is because the screws are going into the end grain of the stretchers, so using the dowel will provide a much stronger joint. With that in mind, I've got some 3/4 inch dowel that I was able to source and a matching spade bit to make the hole. After a test run on some scrap, I proceeded to bore the 6 holes on the stretchers, 1 hole at each end of the stretcher. The holes are located 1¼ inches from the end of the stretcher. This allows the lag screws to pass all the way through the dowel as per the instructions. Due to the capabilities of my drill press, I need to bore 3/4 of the hole first and then add an extension chuck so I can then make it all the way through. After the first hole, I proceeded to mask up the holes with blue painter's tape at the top to make the cut as clean as possible. The bottom of the hole would be okay, as there is a piece of scrap wood underneath that will prevent blowout. So I proceeded to bore these 6 holes. It didn't take that much time, but I didn't rush it either. After boring the holes, I give them a quick sanding using a sanding sleeve from my oscillating belt and spindle sander, and then blow out all of the dust with my air compressor. I cut a length of dowel a bit over the total length of all 6 pieces required. It seems that the dowel is a tight fit and a bit of sanding is required to make it fit the hole. Now I thought that I sanded it enough, however it seems that was not the case and I spent a bit of time getting it in using my mallet. Eventually I was successful and gave it a good clean up. Next I used my hand saw to cut the dowel off as close as possible. This worked quite nicely. I cleaned it up with a chisel and sandpaper and was very happy with the result. I flipped it over, cleaned it up on the other side and it was all done. I then repeated this whole process 5 more times. However, I gave the dowel a good sanding first to reduce its overall size and hence the remaining holes did not require the same force to make the dowel fit. I always find in projects like this that there are repetitive tasks you have to grind through. There's no rushing it, it just takes time to get it done. Anyways, enough rambling. The dowels are now in the stretchers, so it's time for the next step. At this point I need to identify exactly where each stretcher is going to be located, as I will be pre-drilling the holes for the lag screws. This is where some precision will be required, hence why I need to take the time to mark each one accordingly. However, before I start drilling holes, I go over the corners that the stretchers will rest in and make sure they are clean from any excess glue that is squeezed out and dried when I put the pairs of legs together. Before I drill the holes into the stretchers, I need to mark exactly where the holes need to be located. Now I could use a template, however I know that each joint will be slightly different, so instead I'm going to clamp the stretcher in place and then hand drill in 1/8 inch. This will mark exactly the location where I need to drill. I've got a bit of tape on the drill bit so I know when to stop, and I'm using the hand drill as it allows me to go slow. The last thing I need is for an electric drill to accidentally take off and screw things up. So this is another process I need to repeat for all 12 holes that need drilling, as each stretcher will have 2 screws. Luckily this doesn't take that long and it's relaxing to be using a manual tool. With all of that out of the way, I need to work out which drill bit I need to use for these holes. So I use my calipers to measure the thickness of the shank and I end up using a 4mm drill bit. To drill the holes, I have taken my drill press, clamped it to the table and then rotated it 90 degrees so it hangs over the edge of the table. I then rotate the drill press table 90 degrees so it is vertical, which allows me to clamp the stretcher vertically. Each hole is easy to line up as they all have the small hole that I made in the previous step. After making sure the drill bit is parallel to the stretcher, I'm happy to go ahead and start drilling. The hole needs to be 2 inches in depth and I've marked this on the drill bit with a bit of blue tape. Luckily the drill bit is long enough so I can do it quite quickly and before you know it I've got 12 holes drilled. It's interesting too as when I'm drilling I can see the Tasmanian oak from the dowel coming out compared to the pine of the stretcher. After all of this preparation, it's actually time to assemble the legs together. I start off with positioning one pair of legs vertically and then clamping it to the table. Next up, I thread the lag screws into the 6 holes just so they are poking through the other side. With that in place, I then line up one of the stretchers and clamp it in place. Just enough pressure to hold it there while I thread these screws in. Using a hand ratchet, I take my time screwing in the lag bolts, alternating between the two as I go so they are evenly worked in. Once I'm close enough to reaching the end, I remove the clamp and make the final turns to tighten the bolts just the right amount. Not too tight, not too loose, just enough to enter the Goldilocks zone. So I repeat this process for the other 2 stretchers. I need to rotate the legs so I can do the last stretcher with it being supported on the table while clamped. I'm obviously using a hand ratchet as I don't want an electric drill ruining all my hard work at the last moment. There's nothing wrong taking it slowly here. I place the table on its side so I can sit the other pair of legs on the stretchers and screw them in this way. This time I slightly thread the lag screws into the 6 holes, as I don't want them poking into the stretchers until I'm sure it's lined up. Everything goes pretty smoothly here with the last 6 screws, and once they're all in, I double check all of them in case they require any more tightening, but everything seems good. And there we have it, a real milestone in this project. It's taken a lot of work to get this far, and I've learnt so much already. I think this is one of the most beneficial things of following someone else's plans to make something. The specific steps involved teach me different techniques and I learn so much. So let's have a close-up look at the frame. It seems pretty straight, and you can see where I've added the shims to fill in the gap because of the table saw depth issue I had. Those dowels look quite nice. However, in the future, I would pay more attention to aligning the grain direction with the direction of the grain on the stretchers. Regardless of those imperfections, I'm very happy with the result so far. I then proceeded to give the table a sanding over to smooth it before applying a finish. I decided not to record this process as it feels kind of boring. However, the end result was much better. I didn't go crazy making every surface flat, but there are a few spots like where the rails were sandwiched into the legs. These look much better after a good sanding. With all of that done, I gave it a good spray with my air compressor to get rid of all the dust and then gave it a good wipe down with a clean rag. I decided to use a satin varnish. The first coat required me to thin it with 10 to 15% mineral turpentine. This is a sealer coat which takes me about 40 minutes to apply. Once it's done, I leave it to dry overnight and return to it the following afternoon. I give it a light sanding to smooth out the finish, then spray it with the air compressor followed by wiping it down with a clean rag. On the second coat, I start off with the frame upside down, making sure I seal the end grain on the legs first. Once I've done the bottom rails, I turn it over and rest the feet on greaseproof paper. This prevents the feet from sticking to the surface it's standing on. Another 20 minutes later and this coat is done. When I come home for lunch the next day, I'll turn it back upside down and remove the greaseproof paper so the feet get a proper chance to dry. The following evening, I decided not to give it another sanding as it felt smooth to the touch, so I proceeded to give it a third coat. On the next day, when I was examining the legs, I noticed some drips that had formed along the joins of the legs. Clearly, I had used just a little too much varnish in some areas. Anyway, I used a chisel to remove the major chunks and then proceeded to give it a fourth and final coat. Okay, so with all of those coats, I'm very happy with how it's come up and I'm ready to progress to the next stage of the router table. I feel like I've reached a real milestone here and it's a very satisfying feeling. Let me know your thoughts below as to my progress so far. What do you think? I'm looking forward to the next stages of the build and I hope you are too. Until next time, bye!